Thanks for tuning in to Ag PhD. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. One thing in soybean fields that you want to be looking out for at this time of year is nodulation. It's so important for soybeans to be able to produce their own nitrogen. We'll talk about some of the factors that could help your crop produce even more.
Well, I don't care what crop you have, lodging can be a very troublesome issue. Today we're going to talk through some of the things that your lodging problem could be coming from and how to prevent it going forward.
We'll also talk about a grass species plant that's becoming more of a problem. We'll discuss that during our Weed of the Week time. But first, here's our Farm Basics.
Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
If you're a non-farmer, one of the things you may occasionally hear farmers and ranchers talk about is rotational grazing of livestock. We want to explain today what that is and why farmers and ranchers would do that.
Well, having a grass pasture just seems so easy from the outside. It's like, well, hey, you've got cattle, they like to eat grass, so you just turn them out on the pasture and forget about it, right?
Right, piece of cake.
It's not quite that simple.
Well, it can be that simple, but the whole thing is, we look at, as agronomists and farmers, we look at that grass as our crop. And the idea is we're trying to raise as much of that crop as possible, because if we can raise more crop on the same number of acres, we can feed more livestock, and then in the end, we can produce more food for our growing world. So how do we get smart about this and produce the most grass? Well, obviously we've got to do soil testing and take care of drainage, fertilize right, control the weeds, all that type of thing. But this rotational grazing thing is something that's gotten really popular here in just the last 10 years. And there are a couple of main reasons why farmers and ranchers look at this. Number one is weed control, and it really has to do with the overall crop canopy, so we'll talk about that. And then the other thing is just ending up with more total grass production by moving the cattle around to different areas of that pasture on a regular basis.
I'm going to talk about that one because getting more grass to grow in the same size pasture, so we're talking about the same piece of ground here, just getting more grass production, it could be as simple as giving that grass more time to recover after it's been fed on. So think about it this way, if you've got a big pasture and you let the cattle just graze wherever they want to, well, they might have some areas that they hit pretty hard. Well, how hard is it for that grass to recover? It's pretty tough, especially when you've got cattle walking on top of you all the time. But if we divide that pasture up into multiple sections, now we can focus the cattle on one little area of the pasture. We leave them there for a certain amount of time, maybe it's a week, and then we move them to the next area of the pasture. Now, let's just say that you had that pasture in 4 sections. Well, now you've got several weeks for that pasture to regrow, and now you've got grass,
or at least several days.
Yeah, you got grass that's up, a foot tall or maybe even taller, depending on what you have for weather during that time period. Well, you've got healthy grass. It chokes out the weeds. The cattle love it. They don't have to eat thistles and other things that may grow up opportunistically when you've overmowed or overgrazed that grass.
Okay, Darren mentioned weeds. I mentioned weeds earlier, and I just want to explain this a little bit more. Crop canopy is the very best weed killer there is. I realize we're the Weed of the Week guys, and we're always talking to you about, hey, control this weed, a lot of times with herbicide or tillage or something like that. But one of the things we always say is if we can get a great crop growing, that will literally choke out the weeds. It won't allow sunlight to get down to the ground, and it does compete well with weeds. Well, the problem is if that grass gets so short and it's not allowed to choke out the weeds, there are some weeds that do get started in that pasture. That's a bad thing because the weeds rob moisture, they rob nutrients, they rob overall tonnage of the grass. And so what I'm saying here is without even using a herbicide, just a cultural practice, we can absolutely have more grass in our pastures with this rotational grazing that we're talking about. And that, to me, I think is the biggest thing and the biggest reason why we're seeing more overall grass production with farmers and ranchers who use rotational grazing versus those who don't.
Rotational grazing is a great practice that can help improve grass growth out in pastures, and that's desirable grass species. If we've got undesirable grass species, we call them weeds, and if we see this particular weed in our fields, we get really concerned. We'll show you how to stop this tough weed later in the show.
Introducing the SoilMax ZD48, the newest addition to the SoilMax Gold Digger lineup. The first plow designed for smaller class tractors, the ZD48 has been tested on tractors weighing between 10,000 and 16,000 pounds with excellent results. Designed for row crop farms, vineyards, irrigation, and specialty crop farms. The SoilMax ZD48 will install tile up to 48 inches deep, as well as install 3 or 4-inch tile. The ZD48 truly opens up the world of tile installation to more farms than ever before.
Tired of that old warped poly boom ruining your spray applications? Express Boom from Hypro is a fully assembled stainless steel boom that ensures an even application of chemicals every time. Don't wait another season, upgrade today. Hypro, helping you spray better.
Are you looking for an easy way to apply dry powdered products to your stored grain? Do you want to use the applicator recommended by industry leaders for products like Diacon D and other dry powder products? Changing Time CT applicators successfully apply a diversity of products quickly, easily, and accurately. The innovative CT applicators are designed to give you the most accurate application of products such as talc, inoculants, fertilizers, and other dry products. For commercial use or on the farm, you need the applicator industry leaders are using. CT applicators for the changing times.
Leading the charge in strip tillage for more than a decade, the Soil Warrior brings the future to your farm today.
If you're looking to expand your farm's grain handling, you want everything to be fast and efficient. The Quick Belt from Norwood Sales is your all-around grain handling solution. Our conveyor-based system uses an 18-inch belt and a 10-inch tube, which minimizes seed damage while moving more than 10,000 bushels an hour. That's fast enough to fill a semi in 6 minutes. Plus, our hood is designed to gently direct the flow of grain straight down, keeping your crop in condition. Keep your grain and your farm moving with the Quick Belt from Norwood Sales.
Think about any time you've had a lodging issue on your farm. Take corn, for example. After a storm, corn blows down, what's the first thing you do? Okay, after you panic, right away you call the seed dealer and you blame the seed corn because, well, this variety fell down, that other variety stood fairly well, so it has to be the seed corn variety. Here's what we're going to tell you today. Quit calling the seed dealer. It's not the seed dealer's fault. It's the fault, most likely, of fertility. It could certainly be something like drainage or compaction, but most likely it's fertility. That's what we want to focus on today.
You know, the big thing for me, whenever there's a problem on the farm, I just want to figure out what happened and what can I do? What action can I take so things don't happen again? Now, you may say, well, that's what I'm doing with the seed dealer. I'm going to make sure I don't plant that hybrid. Guess what? 3 years from now, that hybrid's gone anyway. The hybrids are going to change every single year. And, you know, you just never know when those wind events are going to come. And certainly there are some hybrids that are a little more prone to these issues than others. However, I'm going to give you a story that's probably 15 years old now. I had a chance to go out to Francis Child's farm. He was farming on the east side of Iowa. And at the time, he was a world record corn grower, the first guy to go over 400 bushels. Well, on the way across the state of Iowa that year, the most popular hybrid planted in the whole state, well, it didn't have the best stalk. And they had a big windstorm in late August, and I saw lots of fields with a sign at the end of the field, proud to show they had this great hybrid out there. Well, it had blown over. So it was either leaning or laying flat all the way across the state of Iowa. And I get to Francis's farm. Well, what sign do I see first? That same hybrid at the end of the field. And I said, Francis, I'm not calling you a liar here, but how do you have that hybrid and yours looks great and everybody else that planted that number, it's laying on the ground? And he said, well, Darren, it all comes down to fertility. And we started talking about fertility on his farm, looking at soil tests, and he was just showing, hey, here's what I've done over the years to build things up so I don't have that kind of problem.
All right, so here are 3 nutrients we want you to look at right now, today. If you've had any lodging problem in any field, go to the soil test from that field, look at these numbers. First, potassium. We want that potassium number to be in the 6-7% range for ideal stalk strength. Now granted, we often say 4 to 8%, okay? But if we're not above 6%, we're really not going to maximize that stalk strength. So we want high levels of potassium. That's really important. And I don't care what your parts per million says if it's high. I mean, if it's really low, then obviously I do care. But I'm just getting at, let's say you have 400 parts per million of potassium. That may not be enough if you have really heavy soil to get up to that 6% kind of range with potassium. Okay, the next one is manganese. Do you have at least 20 parts per million on a DTPA test? Not a Mehlich 3, but a DTPA. Do you have at least 20 parts per million, preferably more? Okay, the next one would be copper. Where are you at on copper? We'd like to see at least 2, 3, maybe 4 parts per million of copper, something like that. So if you can have good potassium levels, good manganese levels, and good copper levels, generally speaking, you're in pretty good shape. And then the other thing, of course, is on the excess side, we don't want you to overdo it with nitrogen, especially real early in the season.
Well, when it comes to those nutrient levels Brian was talking about, he's talking about soil test levels, and you certainly have to have a good soil building program to get all those things up to levels where we should be okay. Then we'd really like to see you doing some plant tissue analysis throughout the growing season to determine if those nutrients are getting into the plant. And if you see, well, hey, my soil test looks okay, but wow, I'm running way short here on the plant tissue test, something's going on. I've got some kind of problem out in my soil. One of the common problems that we see is soil pH being way off kilter. For example, with manganese, we have trouble getting manganese into the crop if we've got a pH that's above 7. So you may say, well, my pH isn't that high, it's only 7.5. Take a look at some of these micronutrients and see how difficult it is for your plant to find them once we get those pHs out of whack. So when we talk about soils, it really doesn't matter what crop. We've been talking a little about corn today, but no matter what crop you're raising, you've got to get things in balance if you want to be successful on the farm.
One last thing I'll mention is plant population. The first time we ever tried 40,000 corn plants per acre, guess what happened? They fell over. What I always tell people is I realize the seed corn companies are telling you, hey, you can achieve higher yields with higher population, and to some degree that's true. But the problem is if your soil's not ready for it, if you don't have the proper nutrients in the soil, so your plants can handle that high a population, you can't go to a higher population. So when we first tried 40,000 population, we had 1.5 to 2% base saturation K. Well, now that we've got 6% base saturation K, I can go to 40,000 and I can still have good standing plants all season long.
If we can eliminate lodging in fields across the country, it will make harvest go so much easier and yields be higher. The other problem that I would love to eliminate is weeds like our Weed of the Week. We'll show you how to stop this tough weed coming up later in the show.
The Guardian Air Twin Spray Nozzle from Hypro produces a twin spray pattern with air inducted droplets for superior coverage, even in dense canopies. Be effective and efficient with your spray application this season with the Guardian Air Twin. Hypro, helping you spray better.
Leading the charge in strip tillage for more than a decade, the Soil Warrior brings the future to your farm today.
This agro-liquid line is something special. A lot of really impressive playmakers. Take a look at Sure K. This guy is an enigma.
But wrap your head around the exceptionally high plant response when compared to conventional potassium sources, the research-proven plant availability, plus flexible application options and mixing capabilities.
Really stellar performance stats. Sure K is a true standout, and that's a winning goal on any field.
With the success of the Case IH Steiger Quad Track and Magnum Road Track tractors, it's no secret why Case IH is the leader of the track. So it wasn't surprising when the competition started imitating us. Because Case IH offered the first 5-axle design to give you more power to the ground, less berming and compaction, all to help you be more productive. Still, we're flattered. In fact, if we weren't already red, we'd be blushing.
Your planter is the single most important piece of equipment on your farm, because without a uniform stand, you can't reach maximum yield. That's why Harvest International set out to design a planter that takes advantage of the newest innovations in planter technology. Built tough for high speed and integrated with the latest precision enhancements, Harvest International planters ensure every seed you plant today puts more in your bin at harvest. Harvest International, planting the future.
Morton is eager to make the building you've always dreamed of a reality. Visit us online at mortonbuildings.com.
One of the soybean questions we get every year from many farmers around the country and really around the world is, hey guys, should I add more nitrogen to my soybean crop? Would that help my yield? Well, that's kind of a challenging question, so today we want to talk a little about soybean nodulation and the possibility of adding more nitrogen to increase yield.
When it comes to soybean yields, no doubt nitrogen is a big component in that, and the good thing about soybeans is they can produce a lot of their own nitrogen through nodulation. Now, with nodulation, we want to maximize that because it's a whole lot cheaper and efficient to have the soybeans produce the nitrogen than to have to go buy it and apply it to the field. So when we think about nodulation, there's a few factors here that are going to be really important. One is going to be just overall soil health. If you've got poor drainage, if you've got other issues out there that are hurting the microbes in your soil, they're going to hurt this rhizobia bacteria that's going to help you with nodulation. So soil health is a big factor. Nutrient balance is another one, and even some of the micronutrients like molybdenum. You'll probably see and hear a number of products throughout the season that say, well, we've got some molybdenum in the product, whether it's a seed treatment or a foliar application or an in-furrow application, and that's going to help you produce more nodules. Well, it may or may not. Again, we're going to need to see a soil test to see if that's necessary.
Speaking of which, on that molybdenum, what we're looking for is 1 part per million. That's it. You don't need much, just a little bit. But test your soil. Just even take one soil test somewhere on your farm and see if you've got molybdenum. We started doing some of that and realized we had none. We couldn't find any. Okay, well, then there's a real good chance molybdenum could pay for you on your farm.
All right, the other thing that a lot of people will take into account when it comes to nodulation and predicting how well your soybeans are going to nodulate is what's the crop rotation? Hey, if I'm in a corn and soybean rotation, I just had beans out there a couple years ago, there should be plenty of those rhizobia bacteria left and I'll be fine. Well, you know what? There will be some, very likely, if you haven't been flooding out or something like that in your field. There'll probably be some rhizobia bacteria, but will you really maximize nitrogen production? No way. Down in Brazil, I've been down to Brazil a couple of different times where guys are raising continuous soybeans, and there are plenty of farmers that we work with in the United States for one reason or another that are raising continuous soybeans, and almost to the man. They say, man, nodulation's a big deal for me. I have to put on inoculant. It's so cheap. I get not only more nitrogen for this year's soybean crop, I leave more nitrogen for next year as well. So it is important that we get those nodules maximized in your soybean crop to get the most yield.
All right, so we talk about this nodulation thing. Yep, that's great. But will adding more nitrogen, if you apply nitrogen, will that help your soybean yield? Here's usually what we'll tell you. If you've been raising soybeans every other year for many years, the odds that adding a bunch of nitrogen, the odds that that'll pay are really pretty slim. Here are the couple conditions where we'll tell you that yes, adding more nitrogen will pay. Number one, if you have bad soil conditions. You've been flooded out recently. You have really high pH or terribly low pH. You just have unhealthy soil, poor drainage, any of those kind of things. Another reason why you may consider using some more nitrogen is if you're at really high yield levels. Let's say you're already at 90 or 100 bushels and you're trying to get to 120. Okay, chances are you're going to need some additional nitrogen. And then the third thing I always look at is how much organic matter do I have in the soil? Understand that in soil, organic matter releases for free a whole bunch of nitrogen every year. And this comes with heat. It really comes late in the season. So think about when soybeans need their nitrogen, it's late in the season. So it's awesome if, let's say you had 5 or 6% organic matter, you can figure 20 to 30 pounds per each percent of organic matter. So that's a crazy amount, 100, 150 pounds you could get just out of your soil for free. If you've got high organic matter levels, the odds that adding more nitrogen will pay, the odds are really, really slim.
One thing that I like to look at on soybean plants throughout the growing season, I like to dig them up, look at that root system, and I may be looking for soybean cyst nematodes, but I'm also looking at the nodules. And here's one little trick you may have heard about before. When you look at those nodules, just split a few of them open and look at what color they are inside. If they're kind of a reddish color, well, they're actively producing nitrogen for your crop. If they're a green or a brown color inside, well, then those nodules are dead and they're really not producing for you. So do take a look at your nodules throughout the season and do what you can fertility-wise, soil health-wise, to really maximize your soybean plant's ability to produce its own nitrogen.
Well, if you want higher yields, yes, nitrogen content in soybeans is tremendously important, but so is weed control. We'll talk about how to control this tough weed coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is brought to you by Dow AgroSciences. Finish the fight against tough weeds with the Enlist Weed Control System.
Weeds are tough, but we're tougher. With unrivaled weed control, reduced drift, and near zero volatility. So, who's tough now?
Weed of the Week is barnyard grass.
It's been fun doing the Weed of the Week segment over the years because so many viewers will say, oh man, you really helped me when I saw the shape of those leaves on that broadleaf plant. Boy, I'll never forget it. I know how to identify it now out in my field. But when we talk about weeds that are grasses, well, a lot of guys say, I just kind of tune out the identification part and the pictures because all those grasses look the same, don't they? Actually, they don't. And we're going to talk about this particular grass, barnyard grass, and how you can tell it apart from pretty much any other grass you've got on your farm.
Barnyard grass has no ligule. So if you pull back the leaf blade from the stem, usually there's a little something sticking up there called the ligule. It's either membranous, where it's all one piece, or it's hairy, where there are some little hairs that are sticking up. But with barnyard grass, it has no ligule. So that's the #1 way you identify barnyard grass.
Okay, so barnyard grass is an annual weed, but it's been a little bit tougher and it seems to be growing in popularity, or growing in its presence, I should probably say, throughout much of the country. So we see growers all the way in the north fighting barnyard grass, and certainly in the south we do too.
All right, let's talk about how to control this tough weed. First of all, in soybeans, absolutely start with the 3 P's. The yellow is the key. In other words, trifluralin, sonalan, prowl, start there.
This is the one that guys have gone away from too, Brian. They don't want to get the mess with the yellow, and if they've used trifluralin in the past, they may say, well, you know what, I like to lay it on the top now. That's fine, you can use prowl. And I remember back in the 1990s, people would say, well, Treflan is better than prowl. No, it was cheaper than prowl. It might be slightly better than prowl, but it was just so much cheaper that guys said, I just want to use that because it's cheap.
All right, so post-emerge, we want you to use clethodim or one of the grass killers there. If you go over to corn, use one of the Group 15s, Outlook, Dual, Zidua,
at a full rate. And here's where we've had a little struggle with barnyard grass. We've used cut rates with some of these combo products.
And then post-emerge, Accent's fine. Otherwise, it could be Roundup, it could be Liberty, whatever you've got there. When we turn to wheat, we'd suggest Prepare, Pre, and Axio Post.
That's all the time we have for our Weed of the Week, barnyard grass. And don't be scared to try and identify those grasses out on your farm. Stay tuned, we've got Iron Talk coming up next.
Unlock your nutrient investment with QuickRoots technology. It contains 2 powerful microbes that can help free nutrients bound in your soil, which can improve access to key nutrients for healthy crops, N, P, and K. Applying QuickRoots technology to seed can lead to improved root and shoot growth, increased yield potential, and maximized nutrient investment. See how you can make your fertilizer dollar go further at monsantobioag.com/QuickRoots.
Your planter is the single most important piece of equipment on your farm, because without a uniform stand, you can't reach maximum yield. That's why Harvest International set out to design a planter that takes advantage of the newest innovations in planter technology. Built tough for high speed and integrated with the latest precision enhancements, Harvest International planters ensure every seed you plant today puts more in your bin at harvest. Harvest International, planting the future.
Morton is eager to make the building you've always dreamed of a reality. Visit us online at mortonbuildings.com.
The buzz on this line is probably the best in 10 years, both in soil and in the plant. Joe, you've been doing this for a while. What's your take?
Well, Don, you take a player like High Energy N, 3 forms of nitrogen, plus sulfur and iron with slow release technology. He's making plays all season long.
Oh, look at his numbers. He's getting it done.
But don't forget about end response. This guy's designed for a quick release nitrogen.
It's looking like another championship season for AgroLiquid.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
With the success of the Case IH Steiger Quad Track and Magnum Road Track tractors, it's no secret why Case IH is the leader of the track. So it wasn't surprising when the competition started imitating us.
Because Case IH offered the first 5-axle design to give you more power to the ground, with less berming and compaction, all to help you be more productive.
Still, we're flattered. In fact, if we weren't already red, we'd be blushing.
I often hear from farmers, I just want to spray in the early morning or in the evening when the wind isn't blowing. We'll explain how to manage that on your farm in today's Iron Talk and give you an update on dicamba too. We always say on our farm we're looking for a day to spray that isn't windy, has no chance of rain, sunny, warm, everything's actively growing, and of course if it fell on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, that'd be great so it didn't mess up our weekends. Well, that virtually never happens. Wind is always going to be an issue. Most days it's going to be pretty windy in the summer, so you got to be really cautious about what time of day you're spraying and which days you choose to spray. So on our operation, we generally spray a lot in the early mornings or later into the evenings, but with a few different weed species where they have leaves that droop at night, that can be a concern. And then, of course, you've got to manage moisture, whether it's dew or rain that may come in the evening, that can be a big deal. Now, the other thing to be concerned about, especially with dicamba, this became quite apparent last year, is the risk of air inversions. On a bright sunny day, sunlight hits the soil and heats it up. Then the air is hottest near the soil surface, and it gets cooler all the way up into the atmosphere. Well, a temperature inversion is when the cold air gets trapped below a layer of warm air. Now, this happens almost every evening on our farm around the time the sun sets because now that heat source has gone away, and the heat is going to rise from the soil, and now cool air fills in underneath. And you feel it when you go for a walk, and you walk down through a valley, and it's cool in the valley, and it warms up as you get to a higher elevation. When it comes to dicamba, this is where we could potentially see some off-target movement if those droplets get caught up in that air inversion and move side to side. The key takeaway is to follow the label of the product that you're spraying, and then also use some common sense. Check the forecast before spraying. Be aware of moisture, wind, or air inversions that may impact your spray. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
That'll wrap things up for today's show, but before we go, we do want to invite you to tune in to the Ag PhD radio show. You'll find us on SiriusXM Channel 147 answering your live phone calls each weekday at 2 p.m. Central. I would also invite you to attend the Ag PhD Field Day that's coming up this summer on our farm, Thursday, July 26th.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD TV show. We'll have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.